Chapter 7 is titled Business Intelligence and Analytics. Uh, Interesting. I know people probably laugh and say, oh, that's a problem. Most businesses don't have much intelligence, especially at the senior level. But if you remember back to the beginning of this course, talked about how you take raw data and transform that into information that can be used for business decisions. So what this chapter is looking at is how do we get from raw data that is just a bunch of numbers, really doesn't mean anything, into something that we use to make the decisions in how we run our business. So as I said, this is the information that we need so that we can apply our intelligence that we hopefully have in all of our senior management so that they make the best possible decisions. So it includes everything. Um, you know, we tend to think of it as it's software applications, it's programs that do everything, and it certainly is and includes that and includes technologies, but it also includes our processes, the things that we do, how we process that information. It's fine. You have the information, but then, how do we make a decision? When I worked for a local company here, we had a new business review team that met once a week. And we analyzed all the new business requests that came in for that prior week. And the team, this was senior management team, and it was called the go, no go meeting. Because what we would do is we would discuss the new business opportunity, the surrounding information, background information, and all that. And then we'd make a decision. Do we go forward with this or not? As the chief technologist was fond of saying, we can do anything, but we can't do everything. So the whole point of that meeting was to decide, where are we going to spend our engineering resources and other activities on which projects, because we couldn't afford to do all of them. And some of them might not have been a really good fit for us. And so it was that policy and practice of having a variety of different people, from sales and marketing to engineering to manufacturing to finance, all of those different perspectives in a room together discussing, does this make sense for us as a company? So that's an example of practices that we were using. In addition to, we were certainly looking at all the other tools available. The author points out that when you're making a decision, the degree of really crystal clear kind of decision making, it depends on what you're doing. If you're on a day-to-day operational decision making, it can be pretty black and white. Do we have enough parts to build the goods that we need to make next week? If not, place an order. But as you go up to strategic, when you're looking long term, where do we need to be positioned? The data that you're relying on there is not so crystal clear. We're trying to look into that crystal ball to see in the future what's going to happen. And we'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but in the strategic area, it's a lot more of what if analysis. What if sales continue to increase at a rate of 20% every year? What would we need to do? Do we have the capacity to expand our manufacturing? Do we have the floor space? Would we need to do a new building? So there's a lot more speculation. And the good news is there are tools to help us do that, which I'll talk about in a minute. The key thing that we're doing here is we're analyzing, looking for patterns. We want to see, is the data that we have trying to tell us something about the future? Last week, I showed you a chart of mobile sales that were consistently, the e-commerce on mobile devices year after year after year were increasing. And so that was giving us a pattern of continued sustained growth unless something, happens. Um, we have a massive solar flare that disables cell phone communications for 18 months, something like that. But we're looking at the data saying, is the data trying to give us a hint, an indication of what the future is going to be? And you'll hear the term talked about, and you'll sometimes see it abbreviated as OAP, online analytical processing. It's just doing that. It's taking all the data and trying to organize it into a pattern for us so that we can make those decisions. Now, one of the tools that we have for doing that is statistics. If you haven't already taken a class in statistics, you need to take a class in statistics. And the only caution I give you is be sure and go to ratemyprofessor.com and look at the potential, instructor that's teaching statistics. A good instructor can make statistics easy to understand for someone who is not a math nerd. A bad instructor with statistics, and it can be sure hell for an entire term where you're just struggling. And so you want to do your homework on the instructor for statistics, but it's such a powerful tool. And so many people don't understand even the basics of statistics, and they make the wrong decision because they look at the data and they think the data is telling them something that it really isn't. And when a simple tool in statistics would have pointed out to them, no, the data doesn't support your conclusion. The other is modeling techniques, and certainly as computers have gotten more and more powerful, we can build models and say, well, let's change this parameter and see what happens to the model that's predicting what would happen in the future. If we change the thickness of the aluminum used in making the frame of an airplane, what does that do to the fuel efficiency, and what does it do to the strength and the potential for fatigue and failure? We don't have to build the airplane with the new material and put it out and try and test it. There's ways that we can simulate that with computers that saves us time and money and efforts. And so that's the advantage we have. There's so much that can be done with modeling that you don't have to actually physically build things. Text analytics, it's just, I think what the author is getting at here, a lot of our data is numbers, values, but some of the information that we're analyzing is text. It's not numbers and data. You can be analyzing let's say you're analyzing information on a social media platform, and you notice an increase in the use of certain words. That can tell you something. You can analyze and say, are more and more people referring to this, particular item or a viewpoint or other things. So it's not limited to just numbers. Okay, I already mentioned a little bit about what if analysis. So the author shows this, with a hospital seminar. They're saying, well, registration fees, we get this amount, parking fees, these are the expenses, and comes down to the net profit and loss. Now, what you can do over there in the column where it says variables and say, well, what happens to our profit if we have to pay $600 for the speaker's fee per session? Well, you just go up and put in $600 and it instantly calculates what your profit is. You know, what happens if we only do 6 seminars per year instead of 12? And so what if means that you're changing one thing at a time and saying everything else is the same, but what if this one thing changes? Now, life is usually not that simple. It's usually not just one thing that's different. It may be 4 or 5. The problem is you really have to think through when you're going to use a what if analysis. You can only change one variable at a time. If you can structure it so that that gives you the analysis you're looking for, Excel has a built into it a real easy way of doing the what if analysis. The flip side of that is goal seeking, where you can take and say, okay, assuming these things are this, but I'd really like to see that net profit up to $5,000. Well, then you go over to the column there, variables, and you say, and here the author has the $5 parking fee. What if we charged $7? You could then look and see, well, the net profit loss now is this. You say, well, that's not quite enough. So what about $8? Oh, that's more than what we wanted to get to. Well, what about $7.50? You could go back and forth like that and eventually come up with an answer. Or you tell Excel and you say, what would the parking fee have to be so that the net profit loss is $5,000? Click, done, one shot. But again, the limitation to it is you're only changing a single variable when you're doing that. Now, once you've built the model, you can certainly create multiple scenarios and change multiple things. It gets a little more complicated, but there are some built-in tools, easy to use within Excel that allow you to do that. So that's the what if analysis. I already talked about goal seeking, optimization as part of that. The last one is forecasting. And we can use, a spreadsheet built by, with Excel, we can forecast into the future. We can say, well, assuming next year we have a 10% growth and the year after that 15%, and we can build the profit loss for each year so that we have our estimate into the future of what's going on. And that's great. But we really haven't used statistics up to this point. Where statistics comes in is it can take a much more complicated set of data where there are multiple variables going on and you've got all this data. And with statistics, I can do a hypothesis test. And what a hypothesis test is, it says, here's the data I've got. My belief is that this shows that this outcome is directly correlated to this particular variable. And then the statistical tool will analyze that, and it will come back and say whether or not that's a reasonable conclusion. And it'll give you a confidence level, a probability estimate of whether that is true or not. And this will, where this helps a lot in, oftentimes if you don't have a lot of data points, really the more data points you have over time, the better off you are, because you can get an anomaly for a particular shift run at your operation where everything worked perfectly. And the next day, everything works terrible. And then the day after that, it's kind of somewhere in between. And so what is normal? So the more data you gather, the better you are. But when you have limited amounts of data, that hypothesis testing will tell you if you have sufficient data to make the conclusion that you're coming to, or if the data is enough different that the real answer is, well, we really don't know yet. It kind of looks like, based on the initial tests, that things are trending in the right way, but we need more data input. So when we're talking about that with digital analytics, another way we can apply that is to our websites and to our social media feeds and e-commerce in general. And for example, here it's showing we're looking at the traffic, the number of website visits each day. And so that can tell us something about what's going on. Maybe we look at days of the week. Maybe we need to go into more depth and look at the time of day. And was there a holiday going on? So we can analyze it and see how's our website traffic varied over time. Every month when I was the web marketing manager for a nonprofit, I every month provided a report to my boss that showed how many unique visitors did we have to our website and what pages did they go to? What were the pages that were visited the most often? How long did they stay on that page? Did the page really engage them? They stayed a long time. And there's all kinds of tools like that. Now, the good news is a lot of those tools are, built in and available to anyone. You can run the reports. There were literally hundreds, if not thousands, of different reports I could run. I was using Google Analytics for monitoring what was going on with the website. But it's something you can look at, and then you can see, what is this telling us? Well, that new article that we put that we thought was going to be, everybody was going to go, wow, that's really interesting. Nobody clicked on it. Maybe the headline was wrong, or maybe it's just a topic that nobody's interested in. But again, it gives us feedback into what's going on by analyzing the traffic on our website. And so that can tell us if we're reaching our goals. Like I said, when I was the web marketing manager, I had goals for my Facebook advertising. So I analyzed the time that, boy, we got great traffic. People are staying on that part of the site, great, and they didn't donate any money. So we didn't meet our donation goals for that campaign. And fortunately, because I had access to the demographics of people, something that you may not realize is that most websites know who you are. They know your gender, your age, your general income. They can even guess at your education level, all kinds of things. But I was able to see that the majority of people going to that particular campaign were 20 to 30-year-olds, which is great because that's the next generation of donors. But 20 to 30-year-olds have very little disposable income to donate to organizations such as the one I work for. The people that I wanted to be reaching were people who were retired, because retired people tend to have more available resources. They've bought all the toys that they're going to buy. The kids are gone and through college. They don't have the same level of expenses. And so, but they've got this in, their wealth that they've accumulated. And so it pointed out to me that Facebook campaign, and in general, Facebook, was not an effective tool for communicating this, marketing campaign we were doing. And so that's the whole point of why you analyze your traffic is because there's a reason that you embarked on this activity in the beginning. There was a goal you wanted to achieve. And so how do you know that you met the goal? You have to analyze what's going on. And that tells you your ad effectiveness. In the case I was talking about, it told me my ad was really effective. The problem was it didn't reach the age group that I wanted to see, read that ad. So this chapter also introduces the concept of dashboards. And really what dashboards are, the whole point of a dashboard is to take of all the literally tens of thousands of different things that we have going on in a business and display some of the really important ones and not necessarily communicate all the other things. If everything's going okay, we don't need to know all the details. But there are some key things that we want to stay on top of it. And so a dashboard is a graphical way of displaying information so you can quickly see how are things going. Gantt charts, which is what this is on the left, is a great one for when you have a project that goes over a period of time and it has multiple things that have to happen that affect, downstream. You can see you've got a product launch date. And if you get a delay in developing the website, it's going to push our product launch date past the goal. And so, well, we got to do something to fix that. So it's a tool that visually lets you very quickly make a decision. It's not acceptable for the web developer to take an extra 2 weeks. Or you may look at it and say, if based on that, if that takes an extra 2 weeks, it doesn't affect the end result. So we're okay. So again, it's focused on graphics to give you a visual concept. And a lot of times you'll see it like up in the upper right here where we've got red, yellow, and green. You may see it as a traffic light showing, what the status is. So sometimes you don't even need the detail like is shown in the lower right here where you've got a graph showing what is trending. You may just need to know, does everything look good? Fine. Or is it into the caution zone where we need to be paying attention what's going on? Or did we just hit a red light where it is what happened? What's the problem? And as I mentioned before, dashboards focus on those key performance indicators. You can't, it would be impossible to read if you tried to display everything that's going on. So you need to just display the things that are essential to your particular business, to the particular function you're involved with at your business. Those 3 or 4 things that really give you the pulse of what's going on. Stay focused on those. Now, thing to remember too, like the author points out, that we're not robots. People use these tools. And people are not perfect. They have weaknesses. So you have to understand the human aspect behind, the person that's going to be interpreting this, using this tool, is a factor that gets folded into that design of the system. Oh, I think I clicked a little too fast. No, there we go. What I wanted to share with you is the supplemental videos for this week. There's some really good ones in there. There's a couple of videos on dashboards that really show you how dashboards can be created and how easily and quickly they can be updated, modified. The other one in there, it's titled Complex Data Simplified Using Graphics. It's actually a Swedish health professional giving a talk to the U.S., to the medical group that was meeting in Washington. and he's talking about infant mortality. And what's fascinating is that he takes an extremely complex data, infant mortality, that I suspect none of you are experts on. And after he goes through and displays the 25, 30 years of data in a graphical format, you come away with a really solid understanding of what's going on. And it's because he was able to take very complex things that we're not experts on and display it graphically in a way that all the audience can understand. And so I think it's a great example of how you can use graphical representations of data to convey information. And then the last one really doesn't have anything to do with this chapter per se, but I wanted to just give you a little brief thing of why it's so important for everyone to be planning for their retirement now. It doesn't matter if you're 20 years old, if you're 30, if you're 50, you need to be looking at your retirement plan today, especially if you're on the younger side. If you're in your 20s or 30s, you have the advantage of time working for you. Take advantage of it. Don't let another day go by without investing in your future retirement. And with that, that's the main points I wanted to get across on chapter 7.